Well, thank you everyone for being here. My name is Hannah Sloan, and Michael, hello from Santa Fe. Welcome. And I'm your host today. Hi, Les Schreier from New York. Welcome. Thanks for being here. We're going to get started with our presentation by artist Arlene Mejorado in one moment. I just want to welcome everyone to this virtual space. We're going to be diving into the thoughts and inspirations behind several photo-based projects by Los Angeles artist Arlene Mejorado, who is our guest. I am an independent curator, as I said, and art advisor based in Los Angeles. And this afternoon's presentation comes to you from Photographic Arts Council, which many of you know is a nonprofit organization based in Los Angeles that creates unique collaborative programming that engages and educates the community in an evolving public conversation about photography and photo-based art. So this particular online event is part of PAC LA's recently launched Year of the Woman, a series of flagship public educational events celebrating notable women in fine art photography. It's made possible through the generous support of the Herberts Foundation. Thank you, PAC President Michael Dawson, for inviting me to host your online events this year. Thank you, Michael Hawley, for introducing me to Arlene's work so enthusiastically. And thank you, Sean Kennedy, for your technical assistance. You can find more information about PAC LA's upcoming programs and membership at paclosangeles.com. Following today's presentation, we have an open Q&A with the artist, so I encourage you all to look at the bottom of your screen. There's a little box that says Q&A. You can type your questions there, and as we wrap up today's sessions, we can have an engaging discussion with the artist. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Arlene Mejorado, who I've only recently met, but whose work gives me the sense that we've known each other for a really long time. Arlene holds a BA in Latin American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin and an MFA in Visual Arts from the University of California in San Diego, my hometown. She's exhibited locally at esteemed galleries like Charlie James Gallery, Velmeter, and Gallery Luisotti, as well as institutions like ICP New York and the Institute of Contemporary Art San Diego. Her work has been published in Vogue, The Atlantic, and the Los Angeles Times. Among many notable awards, she has been the recipient of the Center for Photography at Woodstock Artist Residency and the Magnum Foundation Photography and Social Justice Fellowship. In 2022, Mejorado was commissioned to create a lightbox series for the LA Metro at the Hollywood and Highland station. This multimedia project centers around migrant LGBTQ+ tribute artists who embody and perform as iconic divas in the Latinx community. And very importantly, in August and September of this year, Arlene's work will be the subject of her very first solo exhibition in her hometown of Los Angeles at Gallery Luisotti in downtown LA. So please, I hope everyone will stay tuned for more details and join me at the opening reception to celebrate this career milestone. So I'm now going to turn over this space to Arlene so she can begin a presentation of her work.
Hi, thank you, Hannah, for that wonderful, thoughtful introduction. Hello, to everyone in the Photographic Arts Council community. It's an honor to be here with you all and get to share some of my work. And I will get into sharing my screen. Here we go. There we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Arlene Mejorado. I'm a lens-based artist, working a lot between ideas around memory, landscape, and placemaking. It's important to note that I'm specifically from the San Fernando Valley, and a lot of my work is informed by the San Fernando Valley geography, history, topography, layout, the structure of this kind of valley crater-like place and non-place definitely informs my practice and the way that I think that the canon in which I view my own practice and photography in general. Um, and also, I'm very much informed by the place that my mom descends from, which is Guadalajara, Mexico. So I wanted to start actually with a project that I think begins with rooting myself in a different geography, a distant geography. And it's through a project called Unearthing Archives or Desterrando Archivos. And it's a project that I kind of developed in 2021 through 2022 where I started thinking about, as I worked through ideas around placemaking, landscape, memory, what is the most original or first place I can think of that I would draw myself back to um, and trace myself and my history, my family back to. And it's my grandmother's patio that still exists and still stands in Guadalajara, Mexico, which is a very kind of more dense urban city. Is the second largest city in Mexico, but at the same time, the way that this patio is laid out and my grandmother's home is very antiquated and speaks to a different type of city structure that is very actually rare to find within such a dense central part of the city. And so you can see through this patio the ways that there's this like platform that holds all of the banana trees, and then you have these really old trees that actually my grandmother planted when she first purchased this lot of land that give out guavas or guayabas. And then you can also see the traces of time through the different types of brick technology, starting from adobe and moving into brick and then cinder block. As also the city got higher and higher, the patio kind of tries to keep up with that time as well. And while spending time in this patio and in this my grandmother's home, I kind of started to create this incentive for myself to have a reason to come back, to kind of re-familiarize myself or acquaint myself with the textures and the life that lives in this patio, and to kind of start to build a more of a deeper entanglement with a place that I otherwise am starting to lose a grasp of through time and through the loss of my grandmother and through the ways that diaspora works, where like sometimes families end up rebuilding a home elsewhere. And where was also working with some of the younger members of my family. I felt that childness, youthfulness, playfulness was a great way to enter a space and tap into this kind of house that felt like a bit of a cavity. Had a bit of an emptiness, and so we moved into being in the space and making photographs there. And sometimes my nieces would make photos or I would make photos. And eventually we decided to make this nuevo retrato familiar, or the new family photograph, where we start to think about ways to kind of reorient the family structure, think about ways that, maybe members that sometimes are seen as a bit peripheral in the structure of the family and not always centered became like the center point through like this formal process of the family portrait. And of course, it was important for me to always include the topography of where we're standing, which was these different bricks in the patio of my grandmother's home. And then from there, we moved into kind of reimagining the space. The front of the house is this kind of like green blue stucco, very, kind of a more updated type of wall exterior, but at the same time, one where I wanted to see, just visualize what it's like to have bodies living in front of it or being in front of it. And we started to play around with staging and without too much of a rhyme or reason, we were making different photographs just with my nieces again. And then at some point, I realized that when we made these photographs with three of my nieces together, it made me start to think about my mother and her two sisters that grew up in this home. And I started to think about this level of like accessibility and inaccessibility to memory and to stories, and how there's bits that we know and there's bits that we'll never know and that we don't fully tap into or have access to. And so the way also the image on the left, the three sisters, started to also feel a bit of this like image of like protection and maybe gatekeeping of information that is between the memory of my most recent ancestors, but then also the ways that we can use those same materials to reimagine, or the same stage of space to imagine and speculate like what happened, in this home, and this place that we're all can all trace ourselves back to. Then from there, I moved into looking at some of the family archives that are living in Guadalajara, the ones that we don't have here in Los Angeles. And so through there, I found some really wonderful images of my mother and other family members, but particularly this image that I found of my mom when she must have been about 14 or so really spoke to me. Is this her at in a beach in Guayabitos area, which is like part of Nayarit, the coast. But I just thought it was a very beautiful kind of like Venus-like pose. And then we had set up a curtain in the patio in the back, again going back to play, and just we're like handling the images in different ways. And eventually what we ended up with was this, it was kind of an accidental image, although I had played around different staging. I really liked this idea of one of my nieces, younger, holding up this photograph of my mother and just seeing her outside of motherhood, and thinking about kind of like the activation of this object. This object that holds a lot of sentiment and meaning, but at the same time sits idle and sometimes is not looked at for years. And so, what are ways that this object can kind of begin to vitalize us or inform us is through the actual act of handling it, and in a way contributing to its weathering away or its being worn, because it's this kind of this is something that's maybe counterintuitive to traditional ways of archiving, but I think about how families really archive as well. And maybe are not always the most proper ways institutionally to do it, to preserve their longevity, but the ways that they are enough to keep us going, a few generations out, and to still hold on to them, and but really be able to still touch them. And so this is another image of another photograph that I found interesting of my oldest living aunt and one of my uncles. And I just started thinking about these images up against the walls of this patio lining, and the ways that the textures just kind of clash, but also almost complement each other, and the tactileness of images and these surfaces, and the porousness, and just also though like the ways that these walls do kind of in a sense restrict a level of knowing, and that this photograph is both like a passage, but also kind of a barrier. There's both at the same time. And so I wanted to kind of think about that as I was holding these up. Um, and then while I was in Guadalajara, I was actually able to do this wonderful residency at a space called Taller F, which is a photography-based residency in the city. And so with the support of that, I was able to do things that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to. And one was making large prints, and I selected some archives and printed them really large. This was a photograph of my family that I just absolutely loved the composition and the lighting and how the photograph was made. Possibly by my uncle, but I'm not quite sure. I can't confirm who the actual photographer is. But this is one of a key moment where family met in Tijuana on the border, and they were kind of starting a new life in the United States. And so you see people of different generations. My eldest aunt is standing in the front, kind of as this leader, and then my mother's standing behind her, and then you have the youngest uncle I have standing behind my mother, and some cousins on the left side. And so you're just seeing this kind of like generation, order of generations. And I thought it was really important to kind of bring this image back to the homeland, bringing it back to this place of origin, as Toni Morrison might call it, and where we are kind of coming back and experiencing this landscape that we otherwise don't have access to, but only through this photograph. And so it's a way to bring kind of these bodies back to the space or summon them in some kind of way, but not fully. It's through a photograph and not necessarily through actual family members. And yeah, more images of, or I just brought ordinary, quotidian, everyday kind of photographs of how our lives kind of lived out in Los Angeles, bringing them back into the domestic space and in the kitchen of my grandmother's home. Then I decided to work more with materials and curtains, and this is a photograph of women working. And it's kind of reflective of the labor and like, just women moving outside of this domesticity and like ideas of motherhood and more joining into the workforce of Los Angeles. And so that's my mother on the right, and on the left it's her, but at a lunch hour at one of these factories where they made what is it, computer parts for machinery. And so she's there and just thinking about that connection and also that juxtaposition to this traditional curtain that would fill an interior. Ways of thinking about paint, like these objects that I find, these documents, payments towards the patio, the house, sorry, that my grandmother made, these records, bringing them back to life a bit. And then also like working with these ideas in with my family, these kind of myths, but really they're not myths, they're truths around that our family used to bury things in the patio in the backyard. Me and my cousins got together and we decided to kind of see what we could excavate or unearth. And what we found were these different parts that tell us about a life within the domestic space, and also labor, and how home is a space of labor as well. From shoe parts that the soles, rubber soles, because our family, they were shoemakers, to seamstresses and that type of work, and then broken plates and toys. Yeah, and then these are just some ways in which I chose to exhibit this work in Guadalajara. So it's very special to be able to be in the city and invite some of my family into the space, and Tiro al Blanco, which was the gallery that I put this work in. And then also to be able to be close enough to actually bring in some of the bricks from the patio and incorporate them into the story. And you can see here, this one's called Rinconcito, or Little Corner. More installation images. And then I decided to try like a different iteration of this. When I came back to the US with these images, I was able to, have these large prints. But then I thought, I was losing that sense of the sense of smell, of touch, of the other senses that I felt were really necessary to tell the story. And so I imagined other ways that this work could be installed. And so here it was, I decided to work with some bricks, and over time I grew grass moss onto these bricks that I collected from local patios and installed them kind of at the base of the image. Brought back some of the guavas from my grandmother's tree and mixed them with some of the fresh guavas, just to invoke more of that sense of place and that smell. I had laid out bricks and then removed them, and it left this kind of trace that they were there. And that's just like a detail image of that. And I wanted that sense of like parts of this photograph could be spilling out. And then the last image for this project is called Búscame en las flores blancas, or Find Her in the White Flowers, and it's just a dedication to this base of the guava tree that my grandma planted, that's still there. It's still fruiting. It's still rotting fruit. It's still alive and giving life and producing something that feeds us. But at the same time, thinking about, her other ways that her presence is felt. And I also found this tela, this we piece that she what is it crocheted together and made, and so I was able to incorporate that and kind of make a bit of this installation with that. So that's the first project. I'll move into this one. Breathing exteriors. It was from 2020 when the pandemic started is when I started this project. And I would say 2021, but actually last year I made a new image for it. So I worked on some vinyl banners, printed some vinyl banners really large of different family archives, installed them in different locations close to where those photographs were originally made. And so you can see here, this is the first one, living room dancing. It's a photograph of this living room and that took place in this home. I think a lot of this is also again about staging or creating this incentive to go back to places that I otherwise would maybe only experience through like a car window view passing by or but there's not really something pulling me back. And so this is a way to work in the space, entangle myself back into the space, and really experience it and walk away with like this new marked like memory of how I relate to it. And it's also it's a meditation on what is not there any longer, what is there, and how things change, and the impermanence of space, and how memory is like what is left behind. And so luckily this is a house I still had access to, the backyard, and through my uncle. And so I was able to install this and rearrange some of the found objects just to help me keep up banners. And then just did landscapes. I really wanted to do landscapes, and especially in 2020 through 2021. As you know, photographing people was not as easy. And so I thought about how to photograph places that feel otherwise quiet to me, and maybe don't, there's an absence of people, but yet somehow still feels a bit of a portraiture with having people inserted into the space. This is my cousin Anna's apartment, and she has a wonderful personal archive of photographs. And so we actually worked together to choose this image. And then with her permission, I installed it in front of the old apartments that she used to live at. This one is Children's Party, and this home didn't really have access to the yard, so I thought the next best thing would be to install it in the alleyway behind the home. And I like the way that it kind of it looks almost like it was just how would I say, almost like photoshopped into this vantage point, and that it stands there suspended with within the photo you can see, there's all these children playing, and my little brother is like pursuing the piñata, and then you have my aunt. It's kind of hard to see here, but my aunt is like holding up a camera. So in a way, she's like photographing back at us. And I really like that. I thought that was a powerful kind of gesture present in this, is that she's making an archive as well at that time. And again, during this time, people, there wasn't a lot of cars. The streets were a little more silent. So it was easy to make this type of work, not as challenging. This one, you can see it's quite literally the same exact location. It's called My Mother Madonna because my mother talked about this outfit that she wore at this time and how it was her Madonna outfit. And my mother is an admirer of all of the 80s and 90s divas. So you can see here, basically the photo was made in the interior of the backyard, but I photographed it from the outside. So I installed it, and so in a way, it's like it's like the flipped view. And it's actually one of my favorite photographs of my mom because I just see her so dressed up and almost in her fabulousness. And then you have just like wood and chain link fence and things like that. And she just doesn't seem to match so much the environment, but at the same time she does because I also think it's very beautiful. The flowers and the greenery and just these little bits of her new life in the United States. Winter Feast made with it's like a fond memory I have, and I found some photographs of these dinners that we used to have around Thanksgiving and Christmas. I remember them being really cold and us having to put up tarps to kind of keep some of the cold away, and of course we all fit only in the patio, the back patio. So this was us trying to like perform this like new life in the United States, and I wanted to hold on to that memory, revisit it, and that's why I installed it here in the back in, as close as I could get to the home. Um, this is another photograph of my mom, who also, like my cousin Anna, has a wonderful personal archive, and it's called School of Beauty. This is the school that she enrolled in beauty school. And although there's no image that exists of her while she was in the school, I found this image of her where she was practicing hair and practicing her beautician skills that she was learning during her time in school. And so the school no longer exists, the original one that she went to. Again, this is right after the beginning of the pandemic, so this school was also closed down. I don't know for how long, but I was able to still install it. All right, sorry, I need some water. And then this is the latest image. I was kind of thinking about my dad who passed away last year. So I was revisiting a lot of his photographs, and I don't really have too many photos of him. And so I I definitely don't have any pictures of him with my mom because they split before I was even born. So this was my way of kind of bringing us together during this time. It's very appropriate for there to be cars in the photo. Growing up in the San Fernando Valley, our lives do revolve around cars. And so it's me and my mother, and then you have this small photograph of my dad. And so this was the best way that I could think of bringing us together, and installed it in the home that they both lived in with my grandparents in Granada Hills. And now this home is actually owned by McDonald's. And so that's why you can see some like McDonald's jungle gym figures in the back over the fence. And so we came on a Sunday. I knew that, they don't live there. So I felt comfortable installing this and making the photo in this home that really lives strongly in my memory. And I always think about what it would be like to go back, but I never do. And so this was my way of experiencing it a bit, although didn't feel like I really accessed it much because of the, like I didn't go inside, but I was able to revisit memories by being in the space. And I'll end on this one for this series. It's called Swimming Pool Self-Portrait. And again, during 2021, the pools were empty for extended periods of time, and you could just kind of go. And so um, with this one, there's this memory of me, like swimming, and a lot of the San Fernando Valley is made up of a lot of apartments and condominiums that have like neighborhood pools or community pools. So swimming is not as much of a luxury in the sense that it's a lot of kids do learn how to swim if they live in apartment complexes. There's an abundance of pools. And so I thought about these photos I have of me learning how to swim, and then I couldn't access the original pool, but found a pool in the neighborhood at a park in North Hills. And so decided to visit the pool and installed these images there. And And I thought just in the end, after I made the photo, I started to look at it and I thought I looked so small in this giant pool, and it's 3 feet high, which was maybe the appropriate height for me at the time. And you just have this like long, elongated distance or view of this small image, but it's a big banner actually. And so, yeah, started to think a lot of things about it and the ways in which it kind of felt like a self-portrait when you're kind of rephotographing yourself as your younger self or as you as a child. What does that mean? And the power of the archive and who makes the photographs and who is the author, who points the camera, who makes the composition, and who takes the permission to make the photo. And so I was thinking about all these things as well when I was making this. And this is just kind of like a behind the scenes view of what it was like when I was trying to work on this project. Yeah. And so we'll move into kind of the last project, which is a very layered project, and it's something that I'm continuing to work on. There's a lot of ideas, and a landscape holds you still that I feel like I could just stay immersed in for a really long time and just move in and out of. It's kind of a forest of ideas that are specific to the Sacramento Valley, but I think also talk about bigger things that are bigger than that. And a lot of the work that I'll be working through for the Louis Sothi show in September or August, September, will be dealing with some of what you see in this project. Oh. Okay. This image is called Curtain to the Crater, and I photographed it, made it in Porter Ranch. I was thinking about a few things. One was the ways that the Sacramento Valley has historically been taken or lends itself to filmmaking and being this kind of filmmaking landscape, an area that is originally and Tataviam and Tongva and Chumash, now also is this place that can kind of be disregarded of anything that it was and becomes this like kind of canvas for, this for the filmmaking industry and this fantasy industry. And so one thing I was thinking about was where like E.T. was made, and that E.T. is this film where you would think of these, I would think of these like how you could feel you were elevated and you were like, you'd see these like views. And so I wanted to find a place. I ended up finding like a really wonderful view, um, looking up where you could see the whole valley, and the valley is also coined as the crater. And so I thought all of this just felt really appropriate as this like other place. But then I used this kind of domestic curtain that reminds me of just like a living room or kitchen curtain, that kind of creates a level of inaccessibility or opacity when you're looking through it. And it's kind of the ways that I think of like how I can only show you some things. I can't show you everything when I'm photographing the place that I'm from, that is home. And it will always have a bit of this distorted or filtered view because it's my home. I can't give you an objective perspective. But at the same time, I also choose to withhold some parts of it. And so I guess I saw this as kind of an introductory image to how I move through the project. And then you have just this view of Sylmar. I'm kind of going back to some of the different locations that I feel connected to through my family and where places that they all called home at different points. So this is a place that I have a lot of just deep connection to and memories through my grandparents living here at one point, and thinking of it as this other side of the valley that you won't see in movies or that you won't see in the media. Um, Thinking this one's called Where the LA River Begins, and it's quite literally the point where two waterways connect and form the LA River at the top of Canoga Park, and then it moves through the whole west and south side of the valley, eventually going into what would be Long Beach. And so thinking about this, I was really looking to try to photograph from that middle point that you see there, but actually I couldn't access it. So then I photographed it from a different perspective. And what I ended up finding was, the ways that the geography and the city planning really of the valley creates these really awkward spaces that are not for use, that are just kind of seem like liminal sites of inaccessibility, but often they're like patches of land with little bits of greenery. And so I became really obsessed with that with this project. But also just looking at this Canoga Park High School, one of the oldest high schools in the valley, and the oldness of it all. Of the Sacramento Valley, and how important these points are as historical points. And then these are just different kind of outtakes really of they're not photographs that I've made prints of, but I wanted to share them just to think of like how I had been moving through the valley, looking at my interests in these liminal spaces, or these medians throughout that take up the streets, and that can feel like confusing pieces of land, confusing compartmentalized parts of the city that don't have a clear purpose, often have signs that say pedestrians prohibited, that you're not supposed to stand on, yet life wants to live there or does live there through whether it's manicured or untamed. And it's these raised cement areas that are supposed to be there really just for the cars and for the traffic, or sometimes have like waterways. Um, and so through that, I started to think more about like my body, my perspective from standing at this point. What does it mean? And thinking further into it by working in these really limited places that are very uncomfortable, feel very vulnerable, and also are public. Therefore, there's, I think, a level of pretending or performance that you are in control, even if you're not fully. But I wanted to work with a bit of studio elements in the public space. And so I decided to work with these like bed sheets and some C stands, and just kind of moving through it. And also thinking about that reveal of like, what is this like funny vantage point that you're getting through being in the middle of the street. And then I started to work with other people that are with me when I make photographs. Gianna at the median, she's sitting, and I just framed the photograph and like let her, kind of fire the shutter when she was ready. And so we didn't want traffic in the image, I mean, cars in the image, but we wanted it to look a bit like a in between comfortableness and uncomfortableness. And I think for me, the ideas around this is like how we have these connections to these places, but we don't have quite a place to put these memories to rest. Like we pass through these neighborhoods. We no longer have these homes. We no longer have access fully to any of these places. So where do we place these memories, And I think being in the median kind of makes us think about that, of like it's where we sometimes might feel like we belong, even though we don't. Thinking about the perpetual discomfort of not belonging, of trying to still pretend like you belong, of performing it. This is a portrait of my friend Krista and her baby, with the family baby blanket. I think it really marks a time, the time of the 90s, when there was a connection to this neighborhood, but no longer is there. So where do we stand, and where do we put ourselves? Where do we situate ourselves? Um, yeah, displacement is a part of this. And then eventually decided to try self-portrait. I don't normally, or up until this point, was not really interested in being in front of the lens much, but it kind of had to happen because I needed to talk about how my body felt in these spaces. And when you're making photographs, it's highly uncomfortable. Again, you're highly vulnerable. And so I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about this painting, Christina's World, where you have a woman out in an open field, but that's not the case here. Here we're looking at this limited small place in the middle of traffic. And let's see, did more photographs, and also photographed my cousin Emma, because she has a story about living right off of the Sherman Way median, where she was as a child playing in the apartments, and herself just decided to go outside when she was about 3 or 4 years old to play in the median, and my aunt couldn't find her, and then finally found her like playing in the median. And so I thought that was a really important story. Um, and kind of also informed me in the ways that I wanted to work in the medium. And let's see. Okay, and then this is Artie, my partner, and I photographed him there as well, doing a portrait. Yeah, and that's an ongoing series at the Median. And this is other works I've been doing, handling a mother's archive. I think you saw something. And you saw something earlier in the work I was doing in Guadalajara. This is kind of a continuation of that, of inviting people to look through, handle their mother's photographs, touch them, pass them to each other. Just this beautiful act of revisiting these memories and these moments through these photographs. I wanted to see what that looked like. What are the hand gestures? How does it look, almost like a choreography, of like moving back and forth and then staging that and intentionally framing that, and at times holding the pose even, just so that we could really look at what that contact really looks like. And portrait of my cousin Natalia, girl of the valley. Just thinking about who a valley girl is, who isn't seen as a valley girl, and centering her as the girl of the valley. This is something else I've been working on more, which is I've been photographing a lot of movie sets that happen in public spaces. This was in 2023. I have more images I've been making lately, just of parts of sets from shows and movie, television, all that. But how they disrupt the public space, how they create a barrier between our everyday space and this like moving mobile industry that is like, popping up and then being taken down. And also it feels like such a inverted or juxtaposing image to like the curtain to the crater, where this feels like it's just blocking the view, because this is about making a space for a landscape um, that is being painted by the story that's being told, being determined by that. So yeah, this was for a movie called, actually I forgot what it was called, but I know it was Brad Pitt and George Clooney, and they were actually filming right in this banquet hall for that. I remember my cousin had a quinceañera party at in Panama City. So I just thought that was interesting. And then here we are, um, photographs of where I took a banner that is of a bedroom that I lived in, that I had with my mom when we were young, and then when I was young and she was also young. But then I installed it in like a business window front, and then let there be layers. I thought about how reflective business windows are, and so you have this like back view or like background that is this bedroom. Then you have this view that is me because I'm photographing the window. And then you have this like reflection of the view outward of the street and pedestrians passing by and businesses and traffic. And so I thought about the merging of all of this, of like the intimate space, the inner life with the public space. And again, just thinking about how the meshing of how public space is intimate, intimate space can feel public in this relationship. And then this is the first portrait I ever made of my mother herself. If you recall the image in the first project where she's standing in the beach, I wanted to kind of recreate that image. And so I did that through accessing finally this pool that we used to in the complex that we used to live in. And so we were able to access the pool, and then I installed this backdrop, and then she posed, she looked at her photograph and posed as herself today. And I just knew I wanted it to be like a very beautiful image of her that honors her, but also allows her to be something, both my mother, but someone outside of being my mother. And I think in some ways, it's a way for us to have a cross-generational conversation where I can like better understand and connect with my mother when I am able to like also tap into like who she was as a child and as a young person and kind of see her in that light as well. Topography, streets, like the colors that I grew up dreading, um, monochromatic paint, and how I've come to love it. And then this is, I remember drawing on my father's back with a ballpoint pen, where I just remember this, have this like very beautiful, warm memory of as a kid, my dad would come home tired from work and he would hand me a ballpoint pen because he knew I wanted to play and whatnot. And sometimes he would just lay there and say, "You can draw on me, just draw on my back." And I think for him, it was like a soothing act. And for me, it was fun and playful to even as an artistic kid, to be able to like paint on this non-traditional surface that is his skin. And so then I had a friend that just like volunteered to help me out and just impose and let me kind of recreate that and think about that memory. We did it outside because most of my photos are made under the sun. And again, thinking about these exteriors where intimate things can happen. And yeah, and then we did this and reenacted that. And then also the unplaceability of memories. We don't have access to the home where this took place. So I'm really leaning into that and just having lack of studio space as well. It's like, the urban exterior becomes your studio where you can make things. And these are kind of like contact sheet of different rehearsals and ways that we were trying to do it until we found the right one. This is a continuum with actually worked with someone else, with my partner. And after my dad passed, I've just been thinking about different ways to grieve and what does that look like with photographs, and handling his photographs has made me revisit his image more. And I think again, when I think of my dad, I think of this like very porous brown skin and kind of like how did he live in the city and how did this city, who did he become because of the city, and his relationship to the urban exterior. At one point he was unhoused, and so we used to spend a lot of time in parks and public spaces. So I think that's also part of it. Playing with photographs. Yeah.
Arlene, it's Hannah. I'm just jumping in to say we can wrap up in a few minutes if you feel comfortable, and then we'll move on
Okay.
to questions. But you're doing
Perfect.
great.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm almost done. So this, I was thinking about San Quan Chi, some of the, he was a New York-based Chinese American artist. He did this series that I love where he dressed up in his Mao suit and he made portraits of himself in front of different like tourist attractions and um, touristic sites and throughout Los Angeles. And so, of course, he went to like the Paramount Pictures and the Hollywood sign. And so I kind of was thinking about responding to his work. And so I did this piece with my cousin Carlos, who in front of the Reseda sign. It's on Reseda and Sherman Way in the Valley, and it's an iconic sign from a theater. It still stands there, and I wanted to just use it, make it kind of like our Hollywood sign in the Valley, just to speak to how like it's been used in films, and it's been a bad part of the backdrop of place, but like we grew up there, we lived there, and we served that. Well, my cousin Carlos, he works for these studios. Like he does the heavy lifting and he does the lighting. And so thinking about the families that grow up in the valley that are working class that serve that industry and at the same time just posing in front of it just to be playful and think about it as like our tourist attraction, or if we were tourists in our own hometown, like what would we do? So yeah, that was that. And then I think, oh, okay, these are the last two. Street Side Hearts, just think I've been thinking a lot about also public grieving and public space. So that's, I think, kind of speaks to the ways that I think about entanglement to space and the ways that the people that are from a community mark place with meaning and sentiment. And then here's an image called A Wall with Sentiment, where I work with flower sculptures and installing them. um, yeah, but I think I'll end there. That's a good place to end. And yeah.
Oh, can you just give us a one peek of that installation that you were about
Oh,
to
okay.
switch to so people can see how you also install some of your images in a sculptural way?
Yeah, sure. This is Scenes of an Inner Life, and this was where I collected a mix of images that I've made of interiors, family home interiors, and then some archive images, and then printed them on these transparencies to look like film strips. So that's kind of a close up of that, and it's just window lit. And again, it kind of goes back to using the structure of like a curtain, but thinking about movies, time, the way that we arrange our lives to just kind of make sense of it and make kind of sort out our own memories and how we understand ourselves through this like story structure. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Arlene.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful presentation. If anyone has questions, pop them into one of the boxes, either the chat box or the Q&A. I wanted to read a comment that Craig Curl wrote that says, I like the median photos. You probably know the photo that the Chicano Arts Collective, OSCO, made in 1974 of the four members having supper on a median under a Whittier Boulevard road sign. So are you familiar with that? And did it have any influence on you looking at the medians as a site for artistic production?
Mhm. Yeah, I think once, no, it's a great reminder of this image. I think once I started working in the median, I did revisit that image and think about it more deeply. I think ASCO overall as this kind of interventionalist art group that would work in different spaces, overall is an influence of mine. And I think that seeing the ways to what extent that they would take things in terms of enacting an entire scene and performance in the median is amazing. And yeah, my work, they're much more avant-garde and experimental in that way. And yeah, I did at one point. I definitely think I was initially more sourcing inspiration from like my cousin's story of actually like being a child and playing in the median. And that's when like a light bulb went off for me. And I thought, wow, like what would it be like to actually be there? And again, I think that comes from the perspective of a child and that playfulness and not being limited by having to adapt to all of the things that we become aware of as adults. And so, but yeah, absolutely, Osco, overall, and through the ways that they make photography that blends the idea also of like, is this performance? Is this sculpture? Is this a photograph? Like, I love the idea of like not like having to define the work as one or the other.
Yeah, you seem to move through a lot of different mediums. Do you consider yourself a photographer or lens-based artist at your core, or are the sculptural elements and the zines that you make and filmmaking is equally integral to your practice?
That's a good question. I think I do consider myself, or I call myself lens-based. I think that when I think of where I'm most what is the art that I look at most? It is lens-based work, it's film, it's photography, especially film, which also, and then, but I don't, I do think about welcoming more like different types of mediums, and I've been doing that a little bit more now. There was a time that I didn't, and really just called myself a photographer, but now I don't think that calling myself that feels as important as it is to just say I'm an artist
Mhm.
that works with a lot of photography.
Michael Dawson made a comment. The final installation view reminded me of the Agnes Varda film house installations made from outdated prints of her various films.
Mm,
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a
I'll
question
look for it.
because I'm so interested in old photographs and they obviously are so important to you and the idea of the archive and who takes care of that archive. Was there an inciting moment in your life growing up or something that made you so aware of the preciousness or like the importance of the family photo as an archive and a connection to your history in Guadalajara?
Mhm. Um, well, yeah, I think like I would start with saying like family photographs were my first lesson in photography, and before I had access to a photo book of any type, I had a family album, and those are the first photographs that we experienced. Like me and my cousins growing up, like looking through those, and it was just such a tradition to sit and study those books, and so they were always associated with touching and with feeling them and the textures, and so that's something that's different from being introduced through photography through like a photo book. It's like photography and experiencing in a tactile manner was something that was attached to that experience from the jump. But
Okay.
then I think like over time, photographs also become a way, I think, to like disarm, to introduce conversation, to kind of do research without it feeling so much like research, but just to like learn and storytelling and oral history and all that. So I think the photograph just becomes this like portal or invitation to do that. And so I think like when I was in Guadalajara, it started off as let's look through some photographs just to start getting like some stories going, like just to start hearing, also to build a kind of reconnection with some of my family members there. But then they turned into like really being interested in the photographic composition and the actual photographs themselves, and that's when we started like playing with them and photographing that act of handling them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that aspect of your new work that you're asking other people to handle their photo archives too. It's really interesting. Michael Hawley said, the bedroom through the shop window seems to meld your two sides, the lived urban experience and the collective family memory. Do you plan to revisit the family archives as you evolve, or was that experience, as you said, part of your early development as an artist?
Hmm. Good question. I often think I'm done and abandon ideas, and I tend to go back to them. I mean, the banner pieces that I was doing, the breathing exteriors, I thought I was done, and then when my dad passed, I felt inclined to make a new photograph, and so those things can happen, and but I think like family archives will continue to be a part of my work. I think in different ways. I think right now I'm more interested in maybe look like one is I think the way that I make photos and my compositions and some of the choices I make when framing and the film stocks that I use and all that are also informed by the family photograph. And so in a way, I feel like right now, even with like these like maybe reenactments or these kind of like more like speculative images of like memories feel like they're still somehow have a relationship to family photographs,
Hmm.
even though they're new images.
Absolutely. Craig also said, I was once looking at old family photos with my mom and I couldn't quite make out a face, so I tried to enlarge it with my thumb and finger like a screen. Photos are definitely portals in time and place that we want to go inside. Thank you for exploring that experience.
Mm,
Yeah, one of the things I really enjoyed about your presentation is that you acknowledge the inaccessibility of some of those memories. I know that when I have family photos in my hands, I have this urge to know what it was like being there at that time, but it does feel so inaccessible. Has your insights into how memory works and how place, um, evokes memory and how smell and touch evoke memory, has that changed at all
mm,
as you work with these images?
mm. Um, yeah, I think like there's almost like this agency of the archive of like it'll reveal some things and then withhold other things from you. And I think that they reveal as much as they hide. And I think it's like sometimes I have felt this pressure of like in the past of like you have to know, you should know everything and you should be a good family historian. And I think over time it's been about like you're also at the same time extending an archive, creating a new archive or extension. And so kind of
Right.
just thinking like just like your family members of the past, like you have your own role in how you're building that out. And so I there are things I can know and there are things I can't. I think of a like speaking to the comment from Craig, like the, those banners I think were a way kind of to think about reshaping, or I guess through the scale of them, it was like a felt like you were entering the image more. They're
Hmm.
banners. So what are banners used for? Like they're for selling things on the street, for promoting something, for protesting something, but they're in this case like the texture of the vinyl even just felt like a surface that another kind of surface that you could really touch and handle. But the scale of it made it like something that you could enter more so even through a landscape, and it became like a bigger portal not this small one. So um yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, Hannah.
Yeah, no, that was a great
Yeah.
answer. I'm glad we went in that direction.
Okay.
Are your images that you made for the Highland and Hollywood metro station, are they still viewable right now? So if people visit, they'll see that project.
Yeah, they're still there. And I don't know how long they'll be there. They're indefinitely. So until I hear from Metro, yeah, they've been up for a while. Hopefully they're there. I know when we installed them, one of the images was taken overnight. Like somebody took somehow deinstalled it and took it, but
Okay.
that's a funny other story. I don't know how they were able to move it. But as far as I know, with this, it's public art, so it should all be there, the
Okay.
series, and yeah.
So people can go see that.
Yeah.
And if there are no other questions for Arlene, I'm gonna give everyone a few seconds to contribute a last question. And if not, I'll just remind everyone that she has a solo show coming up at Gallery Luisotti. Many of you will know it. It's in downtown LA. And that will be opening, I believe, in August, right? But you'll have a reception in September.
Yeah, the reception will be September 6th, and the show will be up starting in August, and it'll be up until October.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you, everyone. Joan Benny said, wow, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. Yes, thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Arlene, for taking us on that journey through your work. And we will all see you at your reception in September.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you, Michael, for also helping to bring me into this space, and to connect with the community. I'm so glad we're now connected and moving forward. I'm excited to see what kind of exchanges we have. Yeah. So thank you
Yeah.
so much. And thanks everyone for coming and for all your questions and comments.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you everyone soon.